Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, hope you're doing well. Okay, let's do a quick recap of week 7 of the marathon train so far. Week 7 is also the first week of the 5-week lactate threshold plus endurance train block. Okay, so Monday was just 10Ks of recovery, just did a Bankstown City Sports Complex. I just did the usual small laps around the grass field, nice and relaxed. Tuesday was an 18K run with 8 kilometers at lactate threshold. I just did at the usual Saltpan Creek Reserve around my fast loop. I don't remember why, but I decided to try running with slightly high cadence this time. Normally I do about like 185 steps per minute on average doing like a lactate threshold run, but this time I did like around 192 steps per minute. It did feel like I went a bit quicker than I needed, and I think got fairly close to going overboard a few times. But overall, it ended up being more or less the same as my usual slightly lower cadence lactate threshold runs. So I only ended up doing about like 16Ks instead of the 18Ks, but it's all good. Wednesday was a 24 kilometer medium long run. This time I went along a different route. It was basically my usual route towards like Pfitz Heights, but also a bit further towards Illawong via Alfred's Point Road before turning back. Normally I'm not really a fan of like running alongside major roads since it does get quite noisy and dusty, but I figured I'd give it a try at least once since I usually drive along this road when going to Wollongong, for example. It's not a bad route since there's a proper cycleway and footpath, but it does get a bit steep throughout. I might come back someday and try to go a bit further for a proper long run along Old Illawarra Road and like Menai Road all the way to Sutherland and see how it goes, I guess. Thursday was a 10 kilometers recovery at Bankstown City Sports Complex, again the usual grass field. I also tried doing a new loop this time along both the grass fields to change things up a bit. Surprisingly, it adds up nicely to about 1 kilometer each loop. I think I might do it like that from now on. Friday was a 21 kilometer medium long run at Saltpan Creek Reserve. I felt fairly solid that day and ended up going a bit quicker than expected. I think the cooler mornings are really helping because I wasn't sweating that much afterwards. Saturday was supposed to be a 13 kilometer aerobic run with some speedwork at the end, which is supposed to be 10 by 100 meter strides. I only ended up doing about like 9.5 Ks in total at Rhodes Park Run. I got a bit too excited at the start of the park run, so I slowed down a bit after the 2nd kilometer and then ran the rest of the way at a fairly steady pace before going a bit slower during a cool down. And then finally Sunday was a 32 kilometer long run. This time I went along M5 Linear Park, Cooks River, and then all the way to Rhodes to meet up with a fairly new running club called OPRC, which stands for Olympic Park Run Crew. I forgot to try the single helix lacing technique, so I did end up getting numb toes again about 2/3 of the way in at around 21 kilometers. Then when I reached the Rhodes Park Run area, I had about 6 kilometers to go, and since it's going to be mostly flat from there onwards, I figured I might as well just do a bit of limit testing to see how it feels to run on numb toes for a while, maybe just in case it happens on race day again like last year in Sydney Marathon, and also at a slightly faster pace as well. Not quite at goal marathon pace, but just a quicker effort than what I was doing for most of the long run. The last 6 kilometers was quite uncomfortable but still doable if I really had to do it, but I changed my form a bit, which isn't ideal. I also ended up joining OPRC's Group B long run for the last kilometer or so, which is kind of fun after I already finished my own long run and started to cool down, so I was feeling quite sluggish. Anyways, if you guys ever run around Rhodes, Bicentennial Park or Sydney Park in general, or even do like Rhodes Park Run, you might see them around here and there. They are a fairly new running group and they're a friendly bunch too, so yeah, feel free to join the Strava group and join one of the Sunday long runs, which is split into 2 groups depending on like pace and distance, and sometimes there's even like Tuesday evening track nights at Sydney Park Athletics Track. Anyway, the total mileage for week 7 was about 123 kilometers. It's a fairly big week to start off the lactate threshold plus endurance train block. I'm still feeling fairly fit and kind of refreshed from the recovery week, so I guess I'm just going to try and maintain this momentum for a good while. Okay, let's quickly talk about what cadence is when it comes to running. So simply put, cadence is the number of steps you take per minute. Most of our modern smartwatches or running watches are able to track our cadence, and I'm not entirely sure the tech involved, but there's like some kind of accelerometer inside the watch that counts the number of bumps, vibrations, or change in motions that happen on the watch as we run. Even though we wear our watches on the wrist, it can still track cadence fairly accurately, and even if it's counting arm swings rather than actual steps, that's probably fine since our arms are naturally in sync with our legs while we're running. So in my early days of running, I didn't know what cadence meant or whatever mattered, so I didn't really take much notice of it. I mostly just let my body respond naturally as I ran. Looking back now, most of my early runs were around 170 to 175 steps per minute. I'm not even sure whether that was good or bad cadence to have back then, but it felt mostly natural given I did the same loops on the same pavement surface at around the same effort and wearing the same shoe back then. As of recent times, I have a bit more experience and awareness of my own cadence, and I have even tried experimenting with it on some runs, but it hasn't been something I've worked on specifically too much. So what influences our running cadence? From experience, I feel like our cadence varies depending on a bunch of factors. For example, we have pace. The faster I run, the higher the cadence is on average, since it's usually the simplest way for me to run faster. These days, my faster runs, such as like intervals and races, are done at about 185 to 109 steps a minute. The slower runs, such as like recovery or aerobic, tend to be done at around 175 to 180 steps a minute. The moderate runs, such as like medium long runs, threshold and marathon pace, are sort of in between at about 180 to 185 steps a minute. And then finally the speedwork stuff, like hill sprints and strides, are done at around 200 to 220 steps per minute. Of course, when it comes to increasing pace, the stride length matters as well. So when you combine long stride length with high cadence, you'll run faster. Even if you maintain the same stride length as usual and simply just increase your cadence, you'll still run faster. Or you can increase the stride length but maintain the same cadence and you'll still run faster. But yeah, it really depends on the individual. And then there's hills or gradient. When going up hills, if I try to maintain the same cadence as on the flatter surface, my pace tends to drop and it feels like I have to use more power to get up, which feels tougher and less efficient. So in order not to slow down as much, or even to maintain the same pace as I was going while I was being flat, my cadence naturally goes up a bit when going up hills. I think it's because when we go up a hill, the surface is slanted and it's a bit closer to the body. So it's almost like the distance between the ground and the feet is a bit shorter. So it's easier to take quicker steps, I think. And then when going down hills, if I try to maintain the same cadence as on the flatter surface, it often feels like I'm braking or had to take like longer, heavier steps. It's a bit tricky, but if I want to just flow downhill, then I tend to just let gravity take over. So my cadence increases a bit, but sometimes if I let go too much, then I do feel like I lose a bit of control. Either way, downhills are pretty harsh on the body. There's also surface and terrain. Assuming both are flat with the same effort or pace, I find out my cadence is a bit higher on harder surfaces such as like pavement and concrete, and a bit lower on softer surfaces such as like grass, dirt and trails. It is possible for me to run with high cadence on grass, dirt and trails, but it will definitely be with higher effort and focused than on pavement and concrete. I don't remember what my cadence was like on the treadmill, but I believe it was a bit lower than average on pavement. Maybe it was because it was bouncy, or that the mechanics involved while running on a treadmill, where the running belt kind of moves for you, it's a bit different than running on a normal surface. And then on an athletics track, which is like sort of bouncy and flat, I find that it's pretty easy to maintain high cadence as well. There's also body proportions. For example, I've seen taller runners with longer legs who run with like lower cadence than me. For example, like 160 to 170 steps per minute on average versus my usual 175 to 185. Even when they run fast, sometimes their cadence doesn't increase that much. Sometimes if you run behind or like alongside them, it does feel a bit different, because even when you keep up with them, they appear to run slower, but really they just take longer steps. Sometimes I've seen other runners, oftentimes about my height or even like a bit shorter, with like higher natural cadence as well, maybe like around 190 to 200 steps a minute. They usually seem to be like quite light on their feet, but it might not be as simple as that, because I've seen the opposite true as well. Like there's some shorter runners with pretty low cadence, and there's some taller runners with pretty high cadence. I think weight also plays a role. Like for example, if you're like a fairly light runner, you might find it more natural to have like a high cadence compared to like a heavy runner. I also feel like running shoes have played a role in my cadence. Firstly, there's the weight. When I run with like high cushioning and like heavier shoes, such as like the Glycerins or the Triumphs, my cadence tends to be a bit on the lower end of the usual, or at least requires a bit more effort to ramp it up for fast efforts. When I wear my lighter shoes, such as like the Tempos, the Speeds, the Rebels, or even like my carbon plated race shoes such as like the Endorphin Pro 3s, my cadence tends to be higher on average, and it's also easier to ramp it up and maintain the high cadence as well. But it's also the condition or the wear of the shoe. I noticed that when I run in my older, more worn out shoes, my cadence does increase a bit. It's likely because the cushioning is so worn out that I need to take like lighter, quicker steps so that it doesn't feel as bad. Or maybe it's because there's so much outsole and midsole missing that the shoe just feels lighter. On the other hand, when the shoe is like brand new or like in a fairly new condition, I usually feel more fresh in them and can run with like a longer and more powerful stride. So I don't always need to run with high cadence to make up for it, I guess. I think the type of midsole foam or how bouncy it is also plays a role as well. But personally, I'll notice the weight and condition of the shoe more when it comes to cadence. Sometimes I'll see posts on like social media about 108 steps per minute being some kind of ideal cadence, but I didn't really apply those ideas directly to my own running. I kind of just figured that cadence is too individual and dependent on too many factors for there to be like some kind of magic number. It might work for this person, but might not work for the other person. So for the most part, I just went by feel and like let my body handle it naturally. Sometimes I did intentionally increase or decrease my cadence mid-run, just to experiment a bit. Usually high cadence feels nice for a bit, but tends to be unsustainable for me, while lower cadence just simply felt inefficient, like I was like bounding or like wasting more energy. But that's just how I felt personally. However, when it comes to increasing cadence, I do think the idea of like quicker cadence and shorter stride length result in less force on the body makes sense. If you're quick and light on your feet, you're probably not smashing the ground as hard during each step, so your body just takes less damage overall. It might be a beneficial way of running for some people, but it's definitely not injury proof. You can still get injured in the general ways, such as like overuse. Another thing to consider is that if you're chasing performance, you can only increase your cadence to like a certain point, and then you have to work on stride length anyway. I also feel like as I kept running and got fitter and stronger, I was able to maintain a more steady cadence during most of my training runs. And as I did more types of runs, such as like intervals or speed work, and on like various terrains and surfaces, things just felt more natural over time. These days, my cadence might drop off midway through like a tough workout or like a race, but I think that's more around like energy management or just lack of focus. I think if I suddenly just tried to like switch up mid-run and increase the cadence out of nowhere, it probably won't last long and my form might break down elsewhere as I'll probably be less relaxed overall. So is there a right or wrong cadence for a certain individual? Honestly, I'm not sure. Based on my own experiences, I feel like if you're able to continue to progress with your running and that you're not getting injured much or at all, you might be doing just fine. It's almost like if you don't overthink it, your body naturally knows what it needs to do, given what it has to work with, and that applies mostly to your running form in general and not just cadence. Feel free to like note down your own observations from your own runs. If you never run on grass before, like try running on a grass field, for example, or even like try and maintain like a strong pace or effort while going up a hill. If you tend to run with headphones, try doing a run on the same route without your headphones. Check the data afterwards and see what your cadence was like and whether it lines up with how you felt throughout. Sometimes it's not a bad idea to also ask a friend to observe your form and get some feedback, or even like to consult a specialist or like a physical therapist of some sort. But keep in mind how you feel is also pretty important in addition to what your cadence is or should be. There's so many things involved in our running form and mechanics, and cadence is just one part of it. I don't think we should be aiming for an ideal or certain cadence number, mostly because it's quite individual, depending on factors such as like proportions, and also quite dynamic, depending on factors such as like pace and terrain. Cadence might be something I need to work on as well, so I'll continue to look into it as part of my running journey, but probably not too much. Anyways, I'm not really sure where I was trying to go with this video topic. I hope it was helpful or interesting in some kind of way. Thanks for watching and have a nice day. Bye.